Today's special return guest speaker is Steve Cochran. Steve is the founding director of strategy at the Cultivar Group. We have a great turnout, so we'll conduct the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, please submit your questions at any time via the chat message on the right side of your screen. If you don't know much about ESUB, we were founded on one principle: helping construction subcontractors get paid for the work they do. Our easy-to-use mobile cloud-based project management and document control software helps firms increase productivity, communications, accountability, and most importantly, profits. And this is why we have partners like Cultivar that provide complementary services to helping subs achieve more in business. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Steve today. Hi, Steve. The dais is yours.
Hi, thank you, Tyler, and thanks for that introduction. And welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be presenting on this topic that's very relevant and pertinent to our industry, winning the war on talent, because there's definitely a war that is already started and it's going to persist into the future. So we work with companies to develop strategies and develop leadership teams that execute these strategies. And the strategy all comes down to capturing your greatest economic piece of the pie, if you have it. And today we're going to be talking more about the details here. So I appreciate the introduction, Tyler. And if anybody wants to learn more about me at the end, I'll provide some more information. But let's jump into it straight away. So why do we need a people strategy is the question. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is, why is it important to have a people strategy? And does your organization have a people strategy? And if it does have a people strategy, how effective is it? And how do you know if it's effective or not? So I'm going to jump into a little bit of a background and context, and then I'll move further into some actionable steps that you could take in order to strengthen the people strategy of your firm, and then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. So if we look here, this is no surprise. Anybody who's in the industry, we're definitely dealing with a labor shortage. But even beyond that, we're dealing with an aging workforce. And this has implications in itself. So 50% of our workforce is over the age of 45 years old. And you can see the trend here on the left-hand graph. You see 1985. The average age of the construction worker was 36, and it's continuing to increase as our workforce ages. On the right-hand side, you can see productivity of all other industries, non-farm businesses. That's the top blue line on the right-hand graph. And then you'll notice the construction industry is the green line on the right-hand graph. And you notice that all other industries have become more productive. They've become more digitized. In the construction industry, they actually have become less productive over time. And we're going to explore why that's happening. So 1.6 million jobs are needed between now and 2022. Like I said, we have this aging workforce. Over 50% of our workforce is 45 years or older. And this is problematic because we are struggling to get younger people to enter in the industry. And if we can't attract the right talent, labor costs are going to increase, and then the cost of construction are going to increase as well. And it will make it unfeasible, and pro formas will no longer work with owners as far as construction, and construction will ultimately slow. So when we look here, beyond this, another trend that's interesting on this graph is you'll notice on the dark blue lines, this is the natural growth of our workforce. And if you look back in the 1990s, we see the steady growth starting to increase. The baby boomers are entering in the workforce and they're starting to mature in the workforce. And we hit this peak around 1995, 1999 related to working population growth. And then after that, the blue line, the dark blue line, you'll see that it continually decreases year over year in over the 5-year period until we get to negative growth. So when we look at 2015 and beyond, we're actually dealing with negative natural growth in our workforce. And this is mostly due to baby boomers retiring and exiting the industry, and the workforce, the same population in workforce size not replacing those workers that are leaving. So we experience this negative growth. Well, what's the greater implication of the slide? If you look here, there's a green line, net international migration. That's represented by the green line. So the natural growth of our population, the natural workforce growth, and then the net international migration. These two components make up our workforce. And if you notice, the only thing that's saving us moving into the future, okay, the only thing that's producing above 0% growth is this reliance on net international migration. Now, the assumption here is that there's going to be no economic policies or political policies or immigration policies that impact this. Because if we don't allow international migration to occur, people entering our country to join our workforce, and that green line doesn't meet up to what we're projecting, we are going to experience even more of a labor crunch here. So I said here, backtracking on globalization, any type of backtracking or immigration reform is definitely going to deepen the crisis that we're dealing with here. When we look on a national level, population growth and labor force growth, the labor force growth is represented by the dark blue bar line, the bar chart, and then the green line represents population growth. And what you notice here is beyond the dotted line, to the right of the dotted line, 2010 and beyond, you'll notice that it reverses and population growth starts to exceed the labor force growth rate. So this means that as population grows, but our workforce doesn't, we are going to have a labor shortage. Now, this isn't just construction industry specific. Other industries, manufacturing, healthcare, financial services, even the accounting industry, they're dealing with labor shortages. I was talking to a colleague in Boston, and he was telling me a story from the AICPA, the Association for CPAs out there, and they were really concerned because typically the big four accounting firms, Ernst & Young, PwC, and Deloitte, and all these other big firms that typically go to schools and recruit students into their company, usually they have no problem filling these roles. But in fact, some of the bigger companies like Deloitte and PwC, they were short by 100 recruits. And they had to go into other schools and other programs to try to fill this gap. And some firms just weren't able to fill the gap. So the point is, even stable industries, such as accounting, finance, right, even healthcare, they are dealing with the labor shortages as well. So it's not just competition within our industry, it's competition within multiple industries. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this problem? So one of the most obvious solutions may be to attract younger generations into the construction industry. And typically when I talk with company owners, or I'm dealing with panels, or dealing with other coalitions to try to rectify this issue for the construction industry, that is one of the main things that comes up. In fact, the construction industry is not alone when it comes to recruiting and retaining employees. I mean, if you look at the Army after Vietnam,
Hi, Steve.
our armed services,
Steve Tyler
yes,
here. I'm sorry to interrupt, but all I'm seeing is a blue screen.
yep, that's
Oh, okay.
that's just my
That's
pause screen.
intentional.
Yep, give everybody a mental break here for a second. Thank you, Tyler.
Okay.
The armed services, they dealt with the same kind of issue after Vietnam, and they had to change the message to recruit people into the Army or the Marines and the Navy and so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that when we get into the purpose portion of the presentation. But really, if our goal is and our strategy is to attract younger people into the industry, we have to consider, is this a feasible option? And if so, how do we go about doing this? So the National Association of Home Builders, they did a survey, and they interviewed 2,000 18 to 25-year-olds. And they asked them, how likely is it that you would enter the construction industry based on these different salary levels? And what's staggering is that 43% of respondents, 43%, said they would not enter the construction industry irrespective of pay. Okay, 21% said pay me $100,000 or more coming right out of school or coming with no experience whatsoever, and I'll consider it, which is another way of saying I'm not really interested. So we have 2/3 of 18 to 25-year-olds polled that are just simply not interested in entering the industry. So is it a feasible option to attract the younger generation? Let's explore some of this a little bit more. Oftentimes when I'm talking to companies and I'm speaking at conferences, it's very common for me to get respondents or participants to ask me the question, how do we deal with millennials? How do we motivate them? How do we incorporate them into our culture? Their work ethic is totally different. They're lazy, they're entitled, and they have all these disparaging remarks. And I'll just tell you that I think broad generalizations about a generation is completely false and lacks factual support. So my brothers, I have two brothers who are millennials, and these are some of the hardest workers that I've ever met in my life. And I know a lot of other millennials out there that are super hard workers. So what's going on here? Where is this story coming from? What's the genesis of this all? This entitlement, this laziness, this lack of engagement. Where is this coming from in our industry? So if we look at it, millennials, they're the largest generation to come through our workforce. But what's even more important, they are also the most educated workforce ever in the history of the US. So when we look at it, 18 to, or 25 to 34-year-olds by education attainment, if you look here, those who do not have a degree is pretty much flat around 20%, but those that are earning degrees is on the increase. And in fact, some surveys come out that 75% of jobs in the future will require some form of post-secondary education. And that's because we are transitioning from a service-based economy to experience-based economy, which I'll get into here in just a second. But that's the trend there. And no surprise that along with this higher education comes a huge price tag. So this graph represents the change in student debt. Okay, so you can see student debt is a hockey stick. Well, what this means is that these students are coming out of school with tremendous debt. They're coming out with academic knowledge, theoretical knowledge that can have huge impacts and help with innovation within firms. But they need to be in roles where they can grow, where they can earn money, where they can add value in order to just survive, in order to service their debt. When I was coming out of my master's program, a lot of my classmates, they were coming out and they had about $1,500 a month in debt service in student loans. So that obviously limited them to certain jobs and certain positions that would pay them a certain amount of money just to survive. Even more, if you look here at the next slide here, there's a decrease in the amount of participants, or 18 to 34-year-olds, who can actually afford a home. So if you look on the left, this is the percentage of the population that is living with their parents, okay? So you see quite an increase there. And then you look at the probability of owning a home on the right is decreasing. So you have this younger generation, they want to enter industries, and then more importantly, they want to enter companies that will align with their purpose, that will give them the opportunity to learn and grow, to earn more money, and to add value to the firm so they can actually justify these higher amounts of compensation. Because they want to get on their own. They want to own their own home. And they want to, they don't want to live with their parents. So our industry has to be able to adjust to this, and this I think is where a lot of the entitlement and the laziness, those types of stereotypes come from that are completely false. It's just more out of necessity, and we just don't understand what's going on here behind the scenes. So if we can't empathize with the younger generation, they're never going to enter our industry, and they're never going to be incorporated into our companies in an effective manner. I wanted to do a little survey test because my father-in-law, he always speaks about how home prices were so much cheaper, and back in the day you could buy a home with a swimming pool, and you could buy all these things for $30,000 off the coast of California. So I wanted to put this story to the test and put some actual data behind it. So I did a little bit of research, and what I did is I charted out median household income, and I excluded the impact of inflation. And then I took the median home price, and I wanted to normalize that and just see what the difference was between median income and household house prices. And if you look here, since 2000, and when interest rates became super cheap and we saw the home values skyrocket, there's been a big disconnect and a big gap between median income, which stayed pretty steady in the 70s and 80s, or especially the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and it's opened up quite a bit. And this is causing pent-up inflation in our industry, and it's causing this frustration where people want to come in and they want to add value to firms where they can earn higher compensation, but the firms aren't innovating in a quick enough manner in order to allow people to add value to earn the compensation that they need to survive. And that's really what I'm trying to drive home here in these different charts. So enough on the context. Okay, so maybe we understand, just maybe we're just scratching the surface and we can start to understand where our labor force is and some of the context behind the challenges that we're dealing with them. But I want to jump into something that's even more important, and this is with firms, starting with purpose. So I challenge all of you who are on the webinar today to ask yourself, what is the purpose of your life, number one? Okay, why are you here on Earth? Okay, we've all been endowed with special gifts and talents, okay, unique abilities that are very unique to us that nobody else has. What is our purpose here on Earth? What is your mission here on Earth? Okay, then take that, and what is the purpose of your company? Why does your company exist? Can you answer that question? If you are the CEO or the president or in the C-suite or upper management, or whether you're in the field, wherever you're coming from, as far as this presentation goes, you have to ask yourself and consider, what is my purpose? What is my company's purpose? And do you know? And why is this important? So I wrote a book with my colleague Sarah, and it's called Delivering Value. And what we wanted to talk about in the book is to share all these thousands of experiences that we've had with companies and tie it together in a holistic approach to strategy, helping companies get strategy right to deliver value. On the left-hand side, you'll see the crux of the book. This is the Cultivar Growth Triangle. And you'll notice there's 6 value drivers going around in the green. And in the center is the customer. And so often companies lose focus on the customer. When it comes down to, your strategy is all about delivering value to the customer, right? I don't care what your company's values are. I don't care what your company's mission statement is or vision statement is or whatever you want to put out there, mission, vision, values. It's a bunch of garbage unless you can pinpoint what and how you deliver value, what kind of value and how you deliver that value to your customers. It's all about the customer. Who cares about your corporate values? What are your customers' values? And can your company deliver the value that it needs to satisfy those needs? So we have the customer at the center. We have these 6 value drivers around, and you notice just in the bottom left-hand corner is purpose. So this is the purpose part that I'm talking about. Purpose and plan make up strategy, okay? In order to have a strategy, you need to have purpose and you need to have a plan. So purpose is really where you need to start. So why is it important? So if you look back at the 1770s, when we started war with Great Britain here in the United States in the Revolutionary War, there's a great story of when the British left Boston and they took their march to Concord, and they went there to go seize some arms that were being stored there, some artillery and ammunition and guns and weapons. They went to go seize this in Concord, and so they had a band of soldiers, hundreds of soldiers, and they marched onto Concord. And when they got to Lexington, which is right before Concord, they noticed that there were a handful of Minutemen who were really their brothers, but colonists at the time, standing on the green. to prevent them, right? To make a stand. And they stood with conviction. They stood with purpose. And ultimately, a shot rang out, and then that's the shot that was heard around the world. And then eventually, this is what was the catalyst that evoked the war with Great Britain. The point of this is that what's fascinating is Great Britain, they were the strongest, best equipped, best trained army in the world, arguably. The colonists at the time, they were just farmers in the US, right? They weren't even Americans at the time. It's really, they were all cut from the same cloth. They were from England, right? These were brothers fighting brothers. And what's interesting, the farmers who were trying to protect their homes, they had this purpose. They had conviction behind the cause. And they were able, with this purpose and this conviction behind the cause, they were able to beat the most powerful army in the world. The same is true with your company. If you build a company on purpose, you're going to attract the right people, you're going to retain the right people, you're going to align the right people, and you're going to be executing in the right manner, right? In an aligned manner. So I challenge you to go back to your companies and ask employees at all different levels. People on the field, project managers, supers, you could ask estimating, you could ask BD people, ask them, what is the purpose of our company? Why do we exist? And then compare and see if you have alignment. But it really starts here. Otherwise, you start creating strategies. You create people strategies that are completely misaligned, and I call these kitty cat strategies, where you have a bunch of kitty cats. Meow, you know, meow, kitty. This kitty's running over here. This kitty's running over here, and it's like herding cats. And strategies are very fragmented. They're very straddled, and they're not moving in the right direction. And then ultimately, they fail to produce results. When I was down at the CFMA, I spoke on strategic financial leadership, and I performed some research through the participants. And what I found is that only 42% of companies say that they're somewhat successful in implementing their strategy. And I think the reason is because, number one, it lacks purpose. And number two, the company lacks discipline. It lacks a disciplined process and a structure to execute on that strategy. So that's critical. But employees, they need to feel connected to their jobs. Okay. They need to feel connected to their jobs, because no longer are companies in power. Okay, back in 2009, 2010, companies had the power. Now, suppliers of labor, they have the power. The tables have shifted. Subcontractors are super powerful. So if subcontractors are working with GCs, subs are more powerful than GCs. If you're a subcontractor or even a GC, employees are extremely powerful, and they have a lot of options. So you have to develop a place that retains and attracts the right people. So this graph right here just shows that everything's becoming more important related to purpose with employees. So what is your people strategy? Okay. So what is your people strategy? Do you even have a people strategy? Can you articulate what your people strategy is? So the same kind of question with purpose, I would pose the same thing with you with strategy. If you go to different people in your company, if you go to supers, if you go out to PEs, if you go out to, if you're talking to project managers, wherever you're at in your company, go ask them what the strategy of the company is today, and ask them to clearly articulate it, and compare that to what other people are saying. And I guarantee you that most companies that are on this webinar today cannot clearly articulate what their strategy is. Okay, and strategy is more than just marketing statements that say our strategy is to be the best. Okay, well, yeah, whose strategy isn't that? But what is it? What are the where to compete and how to compete decisions in your company? What kind of trade-offs are you making? Who's your perfect customer? Right? All these different things come down to strategy. Strategy is so much more than just marketing slogans and a bunch of garbage that's stated typically in mission, vision, value statements, which is a bunch of garbage that doesn't allow companies to execute. So what is your people strategy is the big question. So let's talk about where we're at with strategy. Let's talk about the progression of economic value, and let's talk about how customer experience or user experience is starting to reshape the way that companies form competitive advantages. So I was over in India and China. I studied over there during my MBA program, and I studied strategy with all different types of companies. We met with the head of Uber out in India, and we met with him and talked about their strategy and their competitive positioning, which was great. And a lot of these principles I've taken back and applied to my clients. But what the lesson that was really profound to me was this, is that in any economy, okay, every economy starts in the agrarian economy. So if you look up top, the agrarian economy is the most basic building block of any economy. This is the starting point. So India is very much an agrarian based economy that's trying to shift to more industrial and service-based economy. But the United States, when we started out in the 15, 16, 1700s, even into the 1800s, we were very agrarian. Okay, so everybody had their own plots of land. They all had their individual farms, and everybody sold or everybody grew their plot of wheat. And the whole managing principle, the whole strategy was to manage supply, because we were in a commodity type economy. So when you're in a commodity type economy, the key is to manage supply, because if I overgrow wheat on my farm, and if you overgrow wheat on your farm, then there's going to be excess supply, and then prices are going to collapse. And this is what happens when we're commoditized. Eventually supply overruns, and supplies increase, and then prices decrease. And then owners are left thinking, I wonder if I should stay in this low margin business or exit. And then a lot of them exit. And then we start in an industrial revolution, and we move to an industrial economy where we start producing goods because you're tired of growing the wheat. We also mechanize our farms. So instead of having 30 individual farms, I could buy a tractor. Now I could maintain and manage 30 farms by myself, and then all those people are left unemployed, so they move into the city and they start producing industrial goods. And that's how we made the shift in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So we moved to a goods economy. So we took that wheat and we said, you know what, we're going to start making bread, and this is going to save time for people that don't have time to make bread themselves, and we're going to start selling this good. And the whole idea here is to control cost. And if we can control costs, and we can increase our profits, but eventually, just like in a commodity type economy, everybody controls their costs, everybody drives prices down to zero, and this is where marginal cost equals zero, the fundamentals of economic theory, and it doesn't make sense anymore. So then you exit because profits are so low, and you move to a service-based economy. And now you say, you know what, instead of making the bread, I'm going to have a shop, and I'm going to sell 10 different types of bread and provide this service. Or even what we see today, companies creating platforms that allow them to sell the bread virtually on a platform. And this is the service-based economy as we know it. The whole idea here is to improve it quality. So often I see companies, and I work with companies, and they have just these vague statements on their website. They say quality, right? We are dedicated to quality service. We're dedicated to a quality product. And this is very indicative of a service-based economy where people are focused on improving quality. But what happens when quality becomes table stakes? Okay. Quality is no longer a differentiator, it's a standard. I mean, what company out there says, you know what, we do low quality products, we do crappy quality, come work with us. Of course, everybody's going to say we have the best quality, the highest quality. That's standard. And really, you know what controls quality in our industry? Litigation. Because if you don't build the product, or you don't build the project according to spec, then we'll just sue you, and that's how we control quality. So then prices drop, everybody becomes the same, and this is exactly what we're dealing with right now in the construction industry, is this ubiquity among service providers, albeit subcontractors, albeit general contractors. And when everybody becomes ubiquitous in differentiation, as shown on the left axis, the y-axis, differentiation becomes ubiquitous and decreases, and everybody becomes the same, then owners can't differentiate and prices fall. And that's why general contractors are fighting over 2% net profit on average. I mean, that's average. A lot of companies, though, they're happy to get 1%. net profit, which is crazy. So for general contractors, they're going out, they're taking on more risk. Meanwhile, profitability has decreased. Profitability has decreased year over year for the last 5 years by 6.1%, while net revenue has increased by 7% year over year for the last 5 years. So they're taking on more work, more backlog for lower returns. And it's insane that you do $1 billion project, right? Or do $1 billion in revenue and you walk away with 10 million bucks. I mean, 10 million bucks is nothing. Subcontractors, it's no different. Profitability is decreasing for them as well. And they're taking on more and more risks. Okay. So the natural progression from here is an experience-based economy. That's what I want to talk about. So I teach a class at the University of Denver. It's called Strategic Financial Leadership, and it's a signature program that we developed at Cultivar. We do this for the public as well. But this is really my baby, Strategic Financial Leadership. I created this course from scratch, and I brought it to the University of Denver, and I teach it at their business school. But then I also teach it to the public for the AEC industry. But whenever I teach my students or my cohorts, I always like to bring in real world examples, because otherwise they say, oh, Steve's just making these charts and they don't have any sustenance. So I was looking at The Economist and I found this chart and I was like, oh, this is excellent. So I had to cut it out to make sure that people didn't think, oh, he's just full of garbage and he's just making up things. So this is a great representation of what I'm talking about here. You can see employment in the service industry increasing over the years. You can see since 1948, you can see agriculture hitting its tailwind, dropping down very, very low. And you can see manufacturing sliding. Now, this is where there's political differences. So I'm not going to get into political debate here. But if you look at the whole political agenda that was ran with this last election, is all about making America great again, bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, which is great, right? But it's fundamentally flawed because our economy is shifting from industrial to service and service to experience. And that fundamental shift causes these industries to decrease. So it's not a matter of necessarily changing and trying to promote people to come back to manufacturing. It's understanding that we are in a transitional state in our economic progress that we've never dealt with before. And this is very scary for people. And when this happens, anytime this happens, isolation occurs, protectionism occurs. We saw this at the beginning of the 20th century, and this is what caused a lot of the world wars. Isolationism, build walls around us, protect our own country because we're losing jobs. And it's just understanding that we're going through an economic transformation. So companies have to be aware of this. There's another slide here which shows manufacturing as a decline, and this is happening across the country in developing worlds. So this isn't a matter of trying to stop a huge trend that's occurring. It's about how do we adapt and how do we innovate, and this really comes down to the people strategy. Okay, so let me pause here real quick. If people, okay, if we're talking about people, how do we win the war on talent? How do we build a people strategy? I provided some context behind the scenes, right? I talked about the progression of our economic environment. Okay, you have two different options here. You can leave this webinar and do nothing, which a lot of people will do. They'll just say, oh, that's really good information, but let me get back to work. I got customers calling, I have bids that go out the door. I need to close out these projects. I'm busy, busy, busy. Or you can start looking about at how does my company adapt? How do we change the operating model? How do we change the structure? How do we define the purpose and the strategy to attract, retain, and motivate employees? How do we go from a paper process that is completely inefficient, that's causing our workforce and our superintendents out in the field to work all these extra hours because we're not digitized? Okay, how do we prevent against risk mitigation when we don't have a proper document trail to protect against litigation if things go wrong with GCs or with projects? How do we do that? How do we digitize our company? How do we provide great platforms where we can all collaborate? This is a fundamental shift. Look, folks, this isn't just a pep rally of getting together with your people and just throwing out some random things of how to improve engagement and satisfaction. This is a fundamental shift of tearing down your company and rebuilding the operating model to focus on what's most important. This is all about also about differentiation, about understanding how your company can differentiate in an industry where everybody looks the same, where plumbers are the same, electricians are the same, general contractors are the same. And one way that it can be done is by focusing on this experience-based economy and really this customer experience. In this chart here, this just lays out, the fundamental timeline or journey throughout the construction process. So you have the feasibility stage, you have the planning stage, you have the execution stage, closeout, and then you have maintenance, depending if you get into the maintenance portion of the journey. But all of your customers, they're entering at some point along the journey, and they're taking this journey with you, either through digital channels or non-digital channels. So companies can differentiate by having a great customer experience strategy that provides a great experience, a relevant experience for your customers, all the way from pre-construction all the way to closeout. Because if you see all these gray points here, you can have the best pre-construction process, planning phase, right? You can have the best pre-construction phase. You can nail that. You can nail closeout or execution, but when it comes to closeout, you can't finish up your punch list in a timely manner. You delay the CO of a building, whatever it may be, and the customer will never use you again. So you have to get this right. This is where companies can really differentiate. This is a whole nother webinar in itself, but I just wanted to throw this slide up here because people execute. Strategies don't execute. So when you create a strategy, it has to revolve around your people, it has to revolve around your customers, and it has to revolve around the experience that they have with your firm all the way from the beginning phases all the way to the very end. And if that customer experience is broken, if it's archaic, if you don't have digital solutions and it's inefficient, it's going to create a bad customer experience, and customers are not going to use you again. So this is really customer experience at its core. There's a difference here. I'll just point out. Customer experience is not customer service. Okay, customer service is not a competitive advantage. Customer service is something you do to customers. Okay, it's something you do to customers. Customer experience is the way you make your customers feel. Fundamental difference. Okay. That's all I'm going to touch on today. Like I said, that's a whole webinar in itself, but I just wanted to plant a seed in your head. But winning companies are the ones that can deliver unique value through a well-designed people strategy. That's what it comes down to. Let's get into this last section here, and we'll wrap up. I'll give you a minute here to read what's on the slide. What this means, and when we work with companies, it's all about developing discipline and structure that allows employees to thrive, and it allows companies to execute strategy, and allows financial resources to be allocated to earn higher than industry average profits and to increase cash flow. So like really what we do is we meet companies at the intersection of strategy and financial management. Those two have to marry together, and the people are the ones that execute it. That's where the people side comes in to our practice. But we always tell companies that it doesn't matter how good of an employee you hire. If you put them into a bad leadership structure, they're not going to do well. You put an okay, mediocre person into a strong leadership structure, and they're going to thrive. So what the heck am I talking about? Leadership structures really come down to three different categories: dependent, independent, and interdependent. Let me explain each, and then I'll explain on the right-hand side. Dependent leadership structures are very command and control. They're dependent on one person, or they're dependent on a core leadership team to direct the efforts of the company. Very command and control, okay? Interdependent is where you have a bunch of smart people, highly talented people, but they're all working in silos. So they could be across regions, they could be across business units, they could be within the same company on different projects, but they're just not operating together. They're not aligned, they're not collaborating, and they're operating independently. Interdependent is where you have a leadership culture that fosters and builds leaders. Now, what's the definition of a leader? A leader is not bound by title. A leader is somebody who's engaged, somebody who asks questions, and somebody who is curious about learning and growth. Anybody could be a leader, okay? Not everybody wants to be a leader. Interdependent cultures are not cultures where you have democratic votes on everything. Because if that was to happen, the company would never make decisions and never make progress. But it's everybody has a voice. There's still a core team that's ultimately making decisions, but everybody has a voice. Dependent sounds like this. Shut up and do your job. I've been doing this for 20 years. This is the way that we've always done it. Just do it this way. I don't want your opinion. When I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Okay. Interdependent, bunch of kitty cats running around, doing great things, doing good things, but not doing the best things. And then interdependent is where everybody has a voice. You build, measure, learn. You do build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn over and over again to innovate and to bring forth the strategy of your company. On the right-hand side, this is out of my book. I have the walls of culture on the outside. The culture ultimately dictates behavior. Okay, this controls behavior more than anything else. This is the walls of culture you don't need to have in the policies and procedures manual. Show up to work with clothes on. You don't have to say that expressly in a policies and procedure manual for them to do it. This is dictated by culture, right? And peer pressure. Moving inwards, you have big R's and little R's. Big R's are big rules. Little R's are little rules. Big R's are hard, fast rules. Don't drive the company truck drunk. Don't steal from the company. Any of these things don't violate our safety policy. You do any of these things, you're fired. These are big R's. Little R's are best practices. These are recommendations based on experience. And the gap there, the difference between those, the distance between those two things, this is how companies solve problems, okay? These are the unique processes and priorities that they have to solve the problems. Then you have the zone of freedom to the right. So oftentimes you'll have companies like Zappos, right? Their zone of freedom is really big because they have a holacracy structure.
Hey, Steve. I can't hear you. Seems like your audio went dead. Hey, Steve.
How teams are formed
Oh, okay, it's back on.
and how they work effectively.
Yeah, we lost you, Steve. We
Are you
lost you
back
on
on?
audio. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to continue on, but you might have lost what I said, but you could look visually here. This is how you build a high-performing team. I want to wrap up here, and I'll open it up to some Q&A. But why does training fail, and what can we do about it? A lot of companies we work with, they have training departments, or they have some type of a training program put in place, or they send their employees to training programs, and oftentimes nothing happens as a result of them, or more frustration comes out of them because they're just not relevant to employees. And I want to talk about this here for a second. There's 4 areas that you need to develop within your employees. First is technical skills. So, I mean, they have to be able to do their job, the technical side of construction. We get that. A lot of that could be solved by hiring people with experience in the industry, or people out of project management programs. But technical skills, I mean, that's kind of a given. But business skills, this is where a lot of companies are lacking. Let me ask you this: how many of your employees can name the 3 most important financial statements? I mean, think to yourself, what's the most important financial statement of your company? Think about that for a second. and you'll probably say the income statement. If I ask you the second, you might say the balance sheet. If I ask you the third, you might be perplexed and wonder what I'm talking about. Let me tell you this is where it's backwards. The most important financial statement is the statement of cash flows. Number 2 is the balance sheet. And number 3 is the income statement. But how literate are your employees when it comes to financials? Do they know how to read financial statements? Do they know the impact that their role has on the company's financials? Because everybody in the company impacts free cash flows of a business. Leadership skills, developing those, and people skills. These are the 4 areas you need to develop. Everybody needs to be developed in them. Okay, you can't just say, oh, business skills, we only do that training for top leadership or management. That's a big mistake. You have to develop all 4. So why do they fail? It's because most training programs, they're built around neocortex versus the limbic system. The neocortex part of our brain, that's our analytical side of the brain, and this is where most training programs are developed. The neocortex side of our brain likes PowerPoints, likes data, likes charts, right? And a lot of people develop leadership programs around the neocortex, but that's not how we develop leadership skills. Leadership skills are developed in the limbic system. The limbic system is built by repetitive, over and over and over again, hands-on learning and training, experiential training. So when we put together our courses, we always design them based on whether it's a neocortex program or a limbic system program, and we design it so it's cutting edge, so it talks to each side of the brain. Otherwise, you're trying to teach a leadership program through PowerPoint. It is absolutely a waste of time. Applications-based versus principle-based is how we learn. When I was over in Germany studying over there, I realized that Germans, they like the applications-based. America, we learn on a principles-based manner, and I'll just give a quick example. In school in America, we say, this is the formula for a circle, pi r square is the area of the circle, pi r square, and then we practice it after we learn the principles and practice it. Over in Germany, they do the reverse method, and this isn't just bound by cultures or countries. This happens in our cultures as well. So there's some people in your company that learn through applications-based methods, and then others that learn through principles-based methods. And if your programs don't speak to both sides and they're not designed to both sides, then they are completely ineffective. And then finally, they have to challenge employees, right? Like our training has to actually challenge employees. Our strategic financial leadership program is very intense, and it's intense for a specific reason. It's intense because we want our employees to, or we want our participants to go and struggle through it, because that's how you learn. So it has to challenge employees. Here's some other considerations, and then I'll wrap up here. We have just these questions to consider. You guys are all smart, you can read, so I'm not going to read these through you, but take a look at these, ask yourself these questions, and determine whether or not you're doing well in these different areas. So what's going to change after we hang up here? What's going to change? And the answer is absolutely nothing for some of you. And then others, something will change. But if I gave you a lot of information, you feel overwhelmed, let me start with this. Let me just tell you a story. When I was young, I grew up without a father, and I don't say that. I don't need any I don't need a pity party or anything else. But it's actually probably one of the greatest blessings in my life. But I'll tell you, along my journey, when I was a teenager and I was really struggling with different things and struggling by being raised in a single mom family situation, there's a guy that came into my life from church, and he didn't have to do this, but he took the time to teach me how to golf. Okay, he just took a couple hours out of a Saturday, and he took me to a driving range. That one experience, coupled with other experiences of him trying to build me and lift me along the journey, absolutely changed my life forever. And his name's Chad, and I remember this guy, Chad, and I still keep in contact with him today, but he fundamentally changed my life just by granting me and gifting me his time. So if any of you just don't know where to start, and if you feel overwhelmed by how do I develop a people strategy and how do I get into customer experience and all this other stuff, let me just tell you this. The one thing you can do today is to think big, start small, and act quickly. Who can you go to in your company and put your arm around? Who can you go help lift, right now in your company? Who needs you? Maybe they don't need your technical expertise. Maybe they just need somebody to listen. But it all starts with that. It all starts with people. And if you could go build your people and lift your people, you're going to be on the right track of winning the war on talent. I'll wrap up with that. Here's my contact here. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me an email. If there's things I could do better, things that you like, you want more information, or you want to start a conversation, if I can help your company in any way, that would be excellent. I'd love that opportunity to explore different things with you. And then up top there, there's all these different white papers on our website, Getting Strategy Right, the Strategic DNA, so on and so forth. Please go on there. You could download these, a lot of rich information that's relevant to our industry. And I'll leave with that.
Great, thanks, Steve. You kind of touched on this. Maybe you can elaborate on it. There's just one question. You talk about corporate strategy. So where do you start with defining your company's purpose? Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so defining a company's purpose, this is something that takes time, and this is all about build, measure, learn. But it's all about getting the key stakeholders of your company together, and this is much more than just mission, vision, values. That's not what I'm talking about here. But it's truly understanding, why does the company exist, right? But you have to involve the key stakeholders of your firm, and get them together and really define this and nail it out. So it starts with a working session where you roll up your sleeves, and it's well facilitated, it's on point, and this is really where you have to start in order to develop a robust strategy. Great question, Tyler.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve, for another great presentation. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. We'll send out a recorded version of the presentation in a couple days. And everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everybody.